Good afternoon, my name is Dave Norton from Discovering New England History, and we're going to continue on with the Clara Barton story. This is episode 5, and we'll go to the first slide. Now, the Civil War is over. She came back from the Franco-Prussian War over in France and Germany, and then she went right into the Spanish-American War. And now we're into, she wants to be the founder of the American Red Cross. And this picture here is amazing. She wanted a big enough house, big enough place to start the American Red Cross. And this is where she chose it, in Glen Echo, Maryland. And the interesting thing about this, she wanted a place so she could stockpile all kinds of non-perishable food and kerosene lanterns and all types of things in case there was emergency anywhere in the United States. And talk about being resourceful. She actually put in a walk-in vault in her house where she stored over $5,000 back in the day. That was a lot of money, certainly, in the vault. And she said, you know, if a national emergency happens and it's on a weekend, I'm not going to wait till Monday to go to the bank. I'm going to have the cashier ready to go to help out all the people. That's kind of an amazing thing. So we'll go to the next slide. So I took some, well, I had some pictures here that are on the internet of the inside of this house. You can see it's, you see the American Red Cross flag over there, and kind of a welcoming room right here. And this is the Red Cross headquarters, probably around 1900. And it's in Maryland, which is certainly close to Washington, D.C. So we'll go to the next slide. And here's another picture of the room. This is a great picture because she spent hours on that desk right there in the middle of the room, organizing, working on paperwork, anything to do with the Red Cross. That was where she spent most of her time, and that's what they did with this room here. They, her den, they set it up from photographs just the way it looked like back in the day. And so we'll go to the next slide. And there's her desk, close-up of her desk, and there's a famous picture of her in her later years at that same desk. And if you visit the Echo House in Maryland, you can see that actual desk, and you can see all the different activities she was doing there to organize it, certainly in the day and the age before computers. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is really kind of striking here. One of the other rooms she had, she came up with this idea, you know, I want people to see when they drive by that we are the American Red Cross. So she had them take out her windows, and they put in these glass panels, red ones and white ones, as a sort of a Red Cross. So when you see it from the outside, over there on the left, that's what the window would look like with a Red Cross. That's very unique. And then over there on the right is another close-up of that that room that she had. And of course, a lot of executives, a lot of Army officers, as such, would all come there to help her with her organization. And we'll go to the next slide. So now we'll move along. So she has one museum here in Maryland, and of course they actually started another museum here in North Oxford, Massachusetts, and that's the house where she was born in. Picture on the left, that's what it looked like back in the day. And on the right, that's the picture I took. That's when my wife and I visited it, and it's amazing. The entire house, room by room, is all completely done over. It's if you walk back, as soon as you walk in that house, you are back in history. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is really neat because I went into this one room here. Okay, we got a nice grandfather clock. You got a nice fireplace. And we had a very good tour guide. And there's some kind of a story here. And I said, what in the world is on the mantle over that fireplace? And I circled that in red. All it was, some kind of a picture or something. And they had it covered. And she says, oh, we cover that so that the light won't fade or damage the document. And I said, what in the world is that document in there? She said, well, you can't photograph it. But she took off that enclosure there so I could see it. And during the Civil War, of course, she met with Abraham Lincoln. There's a famous sketch of it there over on the left. And he knew all the things she was doing and put her in charge of all the medical supplies and things of the Civil War. And afterwards, before he died, he gave her a certificate, probably, I guess I could describe it as a humanitarian award. And that's what's there. And the tour guide said, that's our prized possession. We lock it up. And it's got an original signature of Abraham Lincoln on it. Right here in Massachusetts. So we'll go to the next slide. And so I'm going through the house, and I said, okay. And I had this kind of like there's a door. I said, well, gee, is that the door that goes to the cellar? You know, what is that? And the tour guide said, oh no, that's where the well is. And I couldn't believe it, so I had her open up the door, and sure enough, there's a bucket and there's a pulley, and you go all the way down there, and there's water. And that's what they did. They had the original well on the side of the property, and they built the house around it, so you didn't have to go outside to get water. Kind of an interesting thing. I guess a lot of early houses back in the day, that was the way to do it. So now you had your water for washing, water for the kitchen, everything right there in your own house. We'll go to the next slide. And we went to this and said, oh, this is Clara Barton's bedroom. And of course they have all kinds of different letters and documents and items from Clara. I was kind of interested in that. And she showed this bed right here, which is really kind of had a unique quilt on it. So I was asking her, very interesting quilt. She said, well, this is a very famous quilt. And I said, okay. And she said, that's actually Clara Barton's quilt she had when she was in the Civil War. And all the soldiers, or certainly many of the soldiers that she treated or that she knew in the Civil War, she had them autograph it, put down their unit number and autograph it. You've got everything from generals and colonels all the way down, I think General Burnside's got a signature on there somewhere, and all the way down to privates and corporals. Those are all original signatures on it. And they displayed that in this room, which is, this is really a walking piece of history right here. Oxford, Massachusetts. And you go to the next slide. And of course, her field desk is also there. There's a picture of it on the right. In North Oxford, Massachusetts, you can see that. That's the one that she would take when she was right down on the battlefield. There's that famous painting of her at Fredericksburg, where she had to get out right in the front line. She had to get out there with the men, you can see that she had a pot there cooking with a fireplace. She was cooking warm soup. Had a whole bunch of these fireplaces going. She was helping all the men change their bandages and dressing. So she definitely worked in the front lines all the time. And in that house there, she had this, they call it a field desk because it's quite portable. And when she was in charge, that was her desk. And if you make the visit to North Oxford, Massachusetts, you can actually see that desk. And we'll go to the next slide. And of course, the American Red Cross just grew and grew. She's the one that started it, and it kept on going. And if you visit Washington, D.C., there's a picture of the American Red Cross headquarters. That's quite a building. And you can see the Red Cross above the doors on the entrance. And that's what she always envisioned. She always envisioned something that the Red Cross could help in, not only in terms of helping soldiers on the battlefield, but now it sort of got into anything, natural disasters, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever. The Red Cross is always going to be there, and that is an incredible building right there in Washington, D.C. And we certainly owe all that to Clara Barton from Massachusetts. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, we're going to cover a little bit some of the items here related to Clara Barton. There's a famous picture which has since been colorized. And on the top, there's her missing soldier's office. And that's the actual sign on the front that they had in the building. And then below that, that's a stamp that was issued for the American Red Cross. Has her picture on it. And then on the right there, that's at a grave site, and that's the with the American Red Cross. And we'll go to the next slide. And there she is on the left. She's getting a lot older now. She actually lived to be late 80s or 90. And you can see she's got a Red Cross pin on her. And that photograph was taken, it's undated, but you can see the Red Cross flag, and I circled on it basically where she is. It was something to honor her, probably when she finally decided to retire from the Red Cross. We'll go to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting story. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on here. This is in downtown Washington, D.C. The year is 1996. And where I circled it here, you can see all those high rises, and there's a lot of 3 or 4 shorter buildings here. Anyway, there was a building there which I circled, and it had been abandoned and vacated for many years. And it was scheduled for demolition in 1996, okay? And that's the area what it looked like. So we'll go to the next slide. And the story of Richard Lyons, okay? He's just a general service worker. And for some reason, this building on the site in Washington, D.C., 1996, the day before it was scheduled to be demolished, or shortly before that, he was a supervisor, and he had to get into the building and go through each floor, check it all out, try to find out if there was any space heaters in it, any maybe propane gas units in there, or electrical supply that was not disconnected. And sort of the last walkthrough on all 3 floors before they demolished it. And of course, you can see on there, it used to be a shoe store. You know, just a regular shoe store. But something in this building struck him. And of course, he was a history buff, I guess you would describe him today. Okay. So now he's kind of interested in it. He opens the door, goes inside. So we'll go to the next slide. And you can see how decrepit it was. I mean, they just let it go. And you can see all the wallpaper's all off it. Everything's all a mess. You can see there's a door over there. And he went up to the 3rd floor. Now, it was a shoe store for many years. He did some research on that. But the 3rd floor, they always nailed it shut, and no one had been in there probably for over 100 years. And the door had this, you can see on that drawing there, the door had this number 9 on it. And so he opened the door, went inside, And we'll go to the next slide. Went down this hall. You can see how bad it was. Everything seemed to be okay. And they saw this curiosity here. Had this curiosity. There was a ladder, an old ladder, just hanging up against the wall. What is that? So he walked over to the ladder, and for some reason, something made him look up into the attic. Now we're on the 3rd floor, so the attic is above this area. So that's where the ladder was. So okay, so now he's climbing up there. We'll go to the next slide. And then he finds up there all these pictures of all these records and things of, and this one is one of them. Registers of missing men. He said, "My goodness, this is the Civil War. Look at all these. This is one of many, many copies that were up there, neatly put in boxes. Had been up there for over 100 years." So we went to we'll go to the next slide. And up there, he's all by himself now. He's up there. He said, "What in the world is it?" He stumbled on this metal sign, which was face down. He turned it over, and lo and behold, it was said, "Missing Soldiers, Office, 3rd story, room number 9, Miss Clara Barton." And he said, "My goodness, this has got some history in it." They had all these old newspapers of the day. Here's one of them, the National News. Lincoln had been shot. Then he found out several of these, on the right there, several of these Civil War canvas tent. It's all folded together, and of course they're quite deteriorated. And he said, I couldn't believe what I'm seeing here. So we'll go to the next slide. So now that's what it looks like today on the left. That's the building, of course, would look like probably after the Civil War. You know, we're just called a regular shoe store, if you will. And here it is side by side. So we'll go to the next slide. And what he did was he stopped the demolition. He went to the federal government because they had possessed this home, this building. And he went to the federal government and said, I think I found Clara Barton's office that she had in the Civil War. And they said, "Oh, we can't do this. This is all designated for demolition. You know, you're probably not right. You probably don't have any evidence of that." And so he started producing all these things, the canvas tent, the documents of the missing persons, soldiers, and then the final thing he showed him was the sign that used to be on the front door. And unbelievable. So it took him many years. He had to get private donations, and he was in charge of it. Get financing so they wanted to make that a museum. So now you can see the same staircase on the left, and I can see the staircase over there, that it was all done over. It's a beautiful museum now to Clara Barton. We'll go to the next slide. And on the 3rd story, which is totally amazing, they said, well, prove it. That's where she had all the medical supplies. And I circled in red there. That's at number 9 on the door. And you can see the sign, Office, 3rd story. That's where it is, room 9, Clara Barton. And she took that whole floor, and she gave herself just a little small corner, put partitions around it, and made that for her bed where she stayed. And the rest of her house, or her rental apartment there, she had it packed with things back in the day. Go to the next slide. And so they started renovating, and you can see that over on the left, and you can see how it's coming along over there on the right. That's exactly where she had all that, all the medical supplies, and she had an office set up back in, you know, the late 1800s. A few clerks there, and they were handwriting letters to all the soldiers as they found them, what happened to them, and this was quite a piece of history. Also quite a piece of New England history, because she's from Massachusetts. And we'll go to the next slide. And the room that I told you, where the ladder was and the trap door to the attic, they redid it. You can see it on the left there. They kept the ladder there, which is interesting. They had the opening for the attic. You can see for heat, all she had was that little wood stove. And the bed just about fit in that area. And that's where she lived. She certainly could have lived in something a lot more appropriate or luxurious than that. And then over on the right is another close-up of the ladder. That's where she stayed at night. And then the front door, what they did was, that's the actual front door. They modified that shoe store front, and they put it just the way it was. And that's the original sign on the front door, which is, of course, where she was. Amazing story. We'll go to the next slide. Now, moving on, that's quite a museum if you get down to Washington, D.C. Now, in North Oxford, this is her burial site. And of course, she was called the Angel of the Battlefield. And she was in the Civil War, Franco-Prussian War, Spanish-American War, and of course, the founder of the American Red Cross. And that's her, another monument to her at the gravesite on the left. And you can see that's a great monument there, Clara Barton, a tribute to her in North Oxford, Massachusetts. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to recap a little bit here. Famous painting, Clara Barton gave medical aid to the wounded soldiers. You can see here that was at Fredericksburg. You can see that. Oh, I mean, the wounded, thousands were just put on the grass and given first aid. And then you can see on the right, the more severely, excuse me, wounded, and they would bring right into anything, a house, a school, anything, any building, so they could have a roof over their head, and surgeons would be there or working on them. And we'll go to the next slide. And I had to have a large shot of that. That's a very famous painting, Fredericksburg, Maryland. We'll go to the next picture. And the Angel of the Battlefield, there's a monument there on the left. And that's a monument says she provided medical help to all the wounded soldiers at the Battle of Antietam. And that's right there at Antietam. And over on the right, that's a marker which I took, and that was in Andersonville, the large prison camp, where the Confederates held all the prisoners of war, the Union. That's where that is right there, with a red cross on it. And we'll go to the next slide. And here's one of those letters. I talked a little bit about those letters. Fortunately, I found one. There it is on the right. You can see it's signed in her handwriting, Clara Barton. She did thousands of these. Office of Correspondence of the Missing Men of the United States Army. Let me read this. I am in receipt of a communication from John Brown of Crowns Point, Indiana, which says, David W. Walters, Company I, 5th Indiana Cavalry, died at Florence, South Carolina, February 25th, 1865. For further particulars, address the informant as above. I am very truly yours, Clara Barton. Short note, but it said it all. And they found certainly an eyewitness that could corroborate exactly where he died. And if he died in Florence, South Carolina, more than likely he was at the Andersonville prison. And at the end of the Civil War, the Confederacy, they knew they were going to lose, and so they shut the camp down and evacuated everyone to try to get rid of all the evidence. And Florence, South Carolina was one of the smaller prison of war camps, certainly not as bad as Andersonville, where they sent a lot of prisoners. And so they wrote over 60,000 letters. And we'll go to the next slide. And of course, when they went down to Andersonville, a Our family has a lot to thank for Clara Barton. There's her picture there. And on the right, Dorrance Atwater from Terryville, Connecticut. He's the one that kept the roll of all the folks that died in Andersonville and how they were buried, and that's exactly what they looked like when they came down there with 7,000, over 7,000 headboards put it in. And one of my wife's side, one of her ancestors died there. We'll go to the next slide. And that's him, Private James Strawn, 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. There's his grave number, number 4555, died in August 1864. You can see on the left, that's how they buried them, just shoulder to shoulder. In the picture I took on the right, there's my wife with the red shirt on there, standing in front of where the tombstone of where James Strawn is. We'll go to the next slide. And there's James Strawn. If Clara Barton didn't do that with Dorrance Atwater, the family and history would never know whatever happened to him, where he was. And we'll go to the next slide. And if you go to the Capitol Rotunda, one of the walls, you can see once again the famous paintings, Clara Barton with the Six Massachusetts Regiment, where they used that as an aid station during the Civil War. There's that picture right there, painting. Amazing. Certainly a tremendous Massachusetts story. We'll go to the next slide. And here's when she founded the American Red Cross, all these posters now that back in the day and that you see. There they are, put them all together. We've certainly a lot to thank Clara Barton for. And once again, this book here, which you've got to read, A Woman of Valor, Clara Barton, excellent story. And once again, our family owes her a lot, gratitude of, so they could identify where Private James Strawn from Connecticut, where he was buried and what happened to him. Otherwise, who knows? It could have been on the battlefields anywhere in the Civil War. So once again, it's Dave Norton from Discovering New England History. And I hope you enjoyed this 5-part series. Have a good evening.